Hi, and welcome to the IDEMS podcast. I'm David Stern, the founding director of IDEMS, and it's my pleasure to be here today with both Lily and George. You've both been on episodes before, but it's our first three-way episode, and it's because we were together last week in Edinburgh at ICMS, the International Centre for Mathematical Sciences, giving a workshop about impact activation. Great to see you both. How are you doing?
Yeah, good to see you too. And I'm excited to see what we get out of this discussion today.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm really excited to be in a podcast with more than just me and David.
I'm going to start by last week was a first for all of us. I'll just give a little bit of background. Over the last 5 years now, IDEMS has been having these impact activation postdoctoral fellowships, which both of you have been through. Lily, we've done an episode, I think, about this quite a while back.
Yes, it would have been about a year ago that we did that episode, because it was as I then left that role into the new role.
Exactly. And George, I think when we've had episodes previously, we've discussed a bit your role. You are currently still an impact activation fellow.
Yep. Yeah, I think my first podcast, we dived into not just what I was doing, but the wider impact activation setting.
Yeah. And now for the first time, I was approached by the director of ICMS when we had a discussion. He said, I like the idea of your impact activation fellowship. Could you give a workshop on that? And so foolishly, I said, yes, why not? And so last week we had a workshop in Edinburgh where we as a group, people who had been through Impact Activation Fellows, myself, Kate, and my fellow director of IDEMS, got together. We spent 2 days planning. We spent 2 days giving a workshop to about 20 participants from actually quite far afield. There was from the US, there were from...
Definitely one from Germany, definitely.
From, a lot, of course, from all over the UK, from...
One from Cameroon.
Cameroon,
living in Germany, but a different one and Italy as well. Anyway, sorry, we could just sit here and listen more.
And what was really interesting for me was that this model we had of preparing, giving, reflecting is roughly what I first encountered when we did maths camps years ago. But I like the model. So I'm wanting to discuss today, get your ideas of that model of actually how we managed to do that preparation, workshop, reflection, but also what you thought of the workshop itself. So I'll hand over. Who wants to start?
I guess I can start talking about the model of it. I think for IDEMS being a remote first company, we don't have that time together that a lot of other companies do. So just from that kind of perspective of being able to come together and actually finding that big productivity spike was very good for planning. From that purely practical perspective.
I think to add, it's really nice to have that kind of time together. And at points I even mentioned to the participants, like, this isn't normal that we're all together. And most of them were surprised. One of them was like, oh yeah, I noticed on your website that most of you are here. Because they went through our website and were like, oh look, we got...
And this is where it's interesting just how many IDEMS members have gone through the Impact Activation Fellowship and then stayed, like yourself, Lily, or will stay, like yourself, George.
That's a threat.
I'm confident saying that now after we had the meeting recently where you basically said you want to stay. So I feel I can say this now, and I'm looking forward to that transition we discussed.
Yeah.
But
no, I agree. I think as for the model itself, I think a lot of people were worried, like within the IDEMS team, of this model, but what's the plan? Whereas I personally have worked with David long enough, or seen you run such things long enough, that I just trust the system that you're going with. Okay, we'll make the plan. That's why we're here now. And I think some people are like, okay, we can make a plan in 2 days. And I'm like, this is what David does. He's done it before. I'm just going to trust the system.
I think it's really interesting because there was a reflection afterwards that there were certain sessions where if there had been longer to prepare, then people would have spent a long time preparing them. And there was one session in particular where there was a really interesting, exciting idea, given the time there'd have been role playing and all sorts of other things. And in some sense, we couldn't afford that as an organization. This was a workshop where our time is not paid. We're a not-for-profit social enterprise. We don't have core funding. So giving this workshop is not part of our funded work. So we lost a lot of money last week, in a sense, because people weren't working on what they should be working on. But it was, I think, so rewarding. And so having it all contained in that week made it feasible. I think realistically, we couldn't have afforded it if we'd given it the time which in other ways it deserves.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to pick up on the difference, and I think this came up in reflection between planning and preparing, because not having that fully set out structure we would have had from fully preparing and spelling anything out allowed us to be a bit more flexible to what the participants were asking for, which I think is something we can get onto in a bit. But yeah, I thought that as a consequence of being, was it prepared but not planned in a way, was actually allowed us to cater more to what the participants wanted.
Sorry. I think that links into what I wanted to say about, because David said it was feasible this way, but I feel that, I know David, I think it's a bit more than just like it being feasible. I think it's also that it gave that like flexibility that we could then have. We didn't need to have these rigid structures that we had to stick to, and we were very flexible throughout the week. After a couple of, I think it was even after the first session, we were like, let's switch up groups. Each of us each of the either Impact Activation Fellows or former basically everyone but David and Kate had a group of 2 to 3 people. And we were very quickly, but I want to meet more.
And what was really interesting is when we were, and this is in the planning days, we started by saying, oh, we're going to switch them up. And then people said, no, we shouldn't switch them up so quickly. And then when they met them, they said, well, we should switch them up. And so that ability to actually recognize that what you want to do in advance and what you actually recognize is the best thing to do in the moment can be different. And so we were prepared to do one or the other, and we were able to make that work as an example. But also, because people hadn't overplanned, if people had spent 2 weeks preparing a specific session, they'd have been very vested in it going the way they planned it. Because everything happened so quickly in those 2 days, the fact that there was one session, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, George, but it was your session on the second day, which basically got hijacked and turned into something else. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Because I think what we'd planned for is that each of the facilitators, so us except Kate and David, were over the course of 3 sessions across the 2 days. Each of us were going to give a 10-minute talk and then break out into small groups and kind of discuss, or at least get the participants to work on the themes coming out of that talk. And what we learned as the workshop went on is after the first 2 sessions, a lot of those themes had already started coming out in the discussions, and actually us and me being in that final session, us doing that same structure, we would start repeating the same themes, and maybe there would have been deeper dives into things, but we thought that probably wasn't the best use of time. I can't actually remember.
What had emerged was the fact that actually they, as participants, they were now wanting to really spend much more time digging in to what could they do themselves, and actually us giving them that space to dig into the more internal discussions which were forming, which was maybe deliberately informal, but were naturally emerging, those emergent topics. We had put some time in for that, but we'd put half an hour, and they clearly needed hours of this time.
I was given the feedback that they wanted more of that time by the end. And that was also obvious by just how the discussions were going and but that was definitely not something that I anticipated anyway, and not something that I would have felt comfortable in the kind of preparing stage to go, and then we'll give them some time to talk amongst themselves. So I'm like, but what if they don't want to?
Yeah, because I don't know how it is in stats or even other areas, but going to a pure maths workshop, my experience is your entire time is taken up by people talking. And then there's maybe penciled in a networking session at the end. But essentially, in that kind of workshop, you never actually get the time to discuss or work on something. And I think the structure that we actually ended up with and what the participants are asking for is what I would actually term a workshop, where they could actually sit and start discussing ideas, facilitated or not. And I thought that was
They
really,
didn't need
really
us.
nice. Yeah, exactly.
By the end.
Not they didn't need us. Otherwise, you just put them in the room and it would be fine. And that wouldn't have been as productive as I think what actually happened. What I think is true is that there was an element of the fact that, and this is exactly this idea of impact activation, that they had now concrete ideas and things that they wanted to try and pursue and to try and find others to pursue this with. They now were wanting to be able to actually say, okay, a lot of what we were explaining is that this isn't something where it's a well-trodden path. You need to find what you're passionate about. You need to actually understand. You need to do things deeply enough, and then you need to get experience. And so a lot of what they then were wanting to discuss by the end was, what experiences can we get? What can we move towards? And that's, I think, that's what I was hoping. And we had scheduled in half an hour for that towards the end. It was clear that wasn't enough. And we had another session which was about their personal journeys, but as a facilitated session. And that is what led to really the fact that now they'd had that and they'd thought about that. They wanted to be discussing that with others who were on similar personal journeys. And what I found very interesting is that, and George, you were, in some sense, academically less far along than some of them. But in this context, you were seen as so much further. It was very interesting how the experience that you have over the last 2 years meant that even people who had spent many more years in an academic environment than you were academically more advanced. They recognized themselves as their peers with people who were still in the middle of their PhD in terms of this impact activation component.
Yeah, and I think what I was really pleased about actually getting to know everyone there was the appreciation that they knew there were these things that they didn't know. And I think that was a really nice and refreshing mindset that maybe you don't get everywhere. You maybe turn up at a conference and people just want to tell you what they know and leave. Whereas this was, people were turning up and thinking, I know I want to do something impactful, but I have no idea how to get there. So even just the small amount of experience I have in this, they were keen to listen to me in that respect.
But I think, am I correct? It also helped you to appreciate just what you've been through over the last 18 months.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, maybe this goes back to the structure of the week as well. Having that planning time actually let me sit and reflect on what I'd done. And it wasn't the reflection time of the workshop, but me reflect on what I've been doing in the past 18 months and actually putting those experiences into context with the experiences of others. Because I think one of the things as IDEMs we're not bad at, we maybe deliberately don't allocate a lot of time to, is just talking about what we're doing. So to actually sit with Lily, Esme, Chiara, Georg, and actually everyone go through their experiences and me actually then being able to relate to them and that I could relate was a really good feeling for me.
That is nice. It's not a reflection I really thought of, I guess, because at the first, because we had these team meetings every year, and at I went to the first team meeting where kind of everyone talked about what they do. Whereas now at the team meetings, we don't talk about what we do as much. We talk more about, I don't know.
Yeah, I know you're right. And this is actually a very interesting thing. It's also part of why when we're thinking about our ideal for impact activation postdoctoral fellowships in the future, we envisage them being cohort based. And this is something where I think then, Lily, as you say, people who have already talked about that, you've had that exposure, that experience of each other. If you have a cohort of people coming through and getting these different experiences, that's then easier to share because you're coming through at that same in that same time span.
Yeah.
And I think that is a challenge that we have. But let me just push on what George mentioned about actually these common experiences. Did you find that, Lily, as well? Were you surprised at how much people had in common? Because you're actually coming from a different perspective from many of the more mathematical, if you want. You're very much on data science, coming from statistics. And I noticed in the event, you would occasionally see yourself, but I'm not a mathematician. Many statisticians and data scientists feel. But did you feel that those commonalities of experience were still there? Or did you feel that you had quite a different experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. Firstly, I don't mind being called a mathematician. I'm more just trying to give a voice to the statisticians and the data scientists out there that don't like that. Just for people to be aware. I don't mind being called a mathematician. But anyway, but in terms of, I guess what it is, a lot of people are talking about that they want to see what they're doing is, okay, I like, say, pure maths. I'm enjoying my pure maths, but I can't see the kind of application of it or how it can be useful, like where the social impact is. Not immediately obvious where the usefulness of kind of statistics with social impact is. Many years ago, I went through a kind of mindset of, I was trying to choose between if I want to go onto the stats side or onto the pure math side. And I went for the stats side because I liked that I could see at least a application of it. And then as time went on, it was, okay, but I don't want to see just a application. I want to see a useful I want to see an impactful application. I suppose in terms of that, it is a bit different because I suppose the skills, some of the skills are more directly obvious, whereas like I did stats as my degree and I get to do stats now. I did R in my PhD and I use R now. Whereas for say, George, you didn't use Python in your degree, in your PhD or any of them, but in the last year you've learned it and now I understand you're pretty good at it.
Yeah.
But I still feel like I got a lot of, obviously, like still doing like the impact activation kind of fellowship, gained so much from that, of course.
I think what I'm picking is the idea of transferable skills, basically, is one of the, I guess it's one of the big things we wanted to get across in the workshop. And we didn't do it explicitly in a kind of, here's the skill you have and here's how it applies, because I don't think that's a good fit for everyone. But I think you are right that maybe people coming from pure maths backgrounds don't think too hard about their transferable skills.
I think it's less obvious on the kind of like how useful their skills are. There's skills that you and David and like Esme have, which blow my mind on how much you can think things through and conceptualize. And that's me just like applying a really simple, that's me just again looking for like a simple application or something rather than that sort of idea.
Yeah, you blow me away with how you can handle data and just read it in a way
That's like something that
other people are just opaque. But you're saying that's something that you directly picked up in your degree.
Yeah.
I want to challenge you on that because in the workshop, you highlighted how your degree didn't give you some of those skills.
Absolutely. That is true. And I believe we've even spoken about that before, but, you know, about not even realizing that I didn't fully understand what standard deviation was and things like this, which then came out over the impact activation fellowship and have actually also really led me to what I'm really interested in now on working at items. But at least like I think that there's a lot more of a direct link. It's still not direct, but there's much more of I can see the link between my PhD and now by doing statistics before and now I work with data here. Whereas if we look at Esme, I don't know what her PhD was on, so I'm not even going to try. But
but I think you're right that there's the more abstract the mathematics you come in with, the less obvious the link between what the skills you've gained in that and then the value that you can bring through impact-oriented work. However, I do think that there's what I found very interesting was that even amongst the participants, there was that full range. We had people who came in who were saying, I'm a statistician, I want to work in a pharmaceutical company so I can see the impact on it in that way of the work that I'm doing. And we had other people who were pure mathematicians coming in who could see no direct applications of their skills and were even questioning, is it true that these skills are useful? Or are we just fooling ourselves? Which is a great question. That's the sort of person I want to employ. The person who asked that
was question. So my question is, do you see that as almost an advantage for activating impact and people who don't have that preconceived path? Or
I think yes, to an extent, that in some sense, but in other ways, and I think, Lily, you've highlighted this, that actually the nature of the education people have gone through is it doesn't matter if you've done stats, data, pure maths, applied maths, the need for activation to actually convert the abstract knowledge you have, the deep understanding of concepts, into things which are, into skills which make you invaluable working collaboratively with partners who are working towards impact. That process is needed equally across the spectrum.
And I think that, yes, yeah, no, absolutely agree. Yes. And definitely as well, like the impact activation it's not okay because you did stats, you're closer to impact activation than if you've done pure maths at all. I think I more just meant that I could see a link better than, or you can, before going into it, get an idea of, okay, I think I can see how stats can work in like kind of social impact. Whereas like pure maths, I don't think I can see that.
I think that's right. You can see how the skills you've gained should be useful.
Yes.
But this sort of part of what we're articulating, and I think this is something where I'm excited to see where this goes, because the hope is we're now going to give a similar workshop again next year. We still need to apply it and get funding, of course, but we've been invited to put that application in. And then we're going to try and actually find ways to communicate this. And George, I think we're planning over the next few weeks, months, to have a number of conversations where we try to dig out some of the concepts that came out that we want to articulate about our vision of impact activation.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that kind of process, because there's, I think, being the, I would say youngest academic, or it's not even academically youngest, the newest joiner, there's a huge amount that I A, don't know, and B, haven't been exposed to yet. And I'm looking forward to this, a way to dig into that as well.
I'm conscious that I really want to dig into actually the workshop itself and the experience of the 2 days with the participants and talk through that. But I'm also conscious that this episode is already quite long. And so I'm going to suggest that we try and arrange another episode in the not too distant future where we go a step further and we try to actually give the listeners a more concrete idea of what happened, what we're thinking, what we experienced in this process of trying to expose people to what our concept of impact activation is. We've talked around that, and I'm fairly confident we won't actually explain what impact activation is in that next episode, but we might hint at it. Are there any last thoughts from either of you to finish this episode?
No, I don't think anything for me, just that it was a really interesting week and I'm looking forward to digging into kind of the workshop itself.
Yeah, I'll echo that as well.
Thank you both.
Thank you.